Between 1986 and 1988, Anna worked as a research officer in the city for early human development at Monash University. In 1988, Anna was employed by then State Forensic Science Laboratory as part of small team formed to introduce DNA profiling to Victoria for criminal casework. By 1994, she was team leader and had developed an interest in education and training in forensic science. In 1997, Anna completed a certificate in competency-based training and assessment, and in 1998, a graduate certificate of public sector management. In addition to her science management and training qualifications, she completed a graduate diploma in legal studies at legal studies at the University of New England in 2009, and from 2000 to 2004, Anna held the position of executive officer of National Institute of Forensic Science, and in 2004 was appointed deputy director. In 2008, she founded Forensic Foundations, a specialized service aimed at assisting both scientific and legal practitioners broaden and deepen their skills. She operates in all areas of the forensic science, focusing on quality management, the interface between the science and the legal systems, and the forensic science-based R&D. She is a Vice President, Australia, Australian and New Zealand Forensic Science Society, and is a council member in Victorian chapter, Australian Academy of Forensic Sciences. She is an associate member of the American Academy of Forensic Science and an affiliate member of the Chartered Society of Forensic Science. Now over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry you had to read all that out. You did very well. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this conference. I have never been to India. I would love to come to India. It's on my bucket list of places to visit, but probably not for the next 12, 18 months or so. I think at the moment travel's going to be a little bit restricted, but I'd love to come and visit you in India. I've watched lots of programs on television set in India, and it looks like a beautiful country. So thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this workshop, and particularly since the focus is on women and children. I think this is such an important area. Obviously I'm a woman, I've got children. I think this is very, very important. What I'm going to do, just to start off, is I'm going to share my screen. But what I'm going to share is actually Google Maps. So hopefully you can see Google Maps. Can you see my screen? Hello? Yes, you can see my screen. Okay, so
yes, ma'am. We can see.
Fantastic. So I just thought I'd show you where I am. So that's India. If we head this way slowly, I don't want to make anybody seasick. We hit Australia. There's a lot of desert. That's what that sort of light brown colour is. That's desert. So most of the population of Australia is around the coast, where it's green. So one of the questions that was asked of Barry was about the organisation of forensic science in the US. So I thought what I might do is just very quickly tell you about Australia. So Australia has 6 states: Western Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania. And we also have 2 territories, the Australian Capital Territory and the Northern Territory. Each of these states has its own police force and its own forensic science services. In addition, we have the Australian Federal Police that are responsible for federal offences, and they cover the whole of Australia, and they also have their own forensic service. So basically we have 9 jurisdictions and 9 different sets of forensic science service providers. The National Institute of Forensic Science, of which I was Deputy Director, has a coordinating role of all of the services within Australia. So if we just scroll in, and again, I don't want to make you seasick, but I come from Melbourne, down here. Just wait for it to refresh a little bit. And I live out round about here. And at the moment, my office is in my home because of COVID. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing that slide, and I will now try and share my actual presentation. Right, thank you. So again, I hope you can see my slide. What I'm going to be talking about today is a miscarriage of justice which occurred in my jurisdiction in Victoria. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from this particular case study. And I'm really building on something that Barry was talking about, because he was talking about the investigation of crime needs a multi-agency response. And that's where this particular case fell down. So I just want to start off by thinking about if you have a case, where does it start? Well, usually you have a complainant. And because we're talking about women and children here, I'm suggesting that the complainant in this particular case is a woman. So she has something to allege, that something has happened to her. And so she'll go to the local police station, or she'll phone for police to attend where she is, and the first responders will respond to her complaint. And depending on what that complaint is, they will then bring in other services. So in the case of a sexual assault, that might include a forensic medical officer. The complainant will be taken, in Australia, the complainant will be taken to a medical centre which is set up for the examination of sexual assault victims. And she will be interviewed by a medical officer. She will be treated for any injuries that she may have occurred, and samples will be collected for subsequent forensic analysis. Now, if the complainant is deceased, that would be a forensic pathologist would be doing that. But in the case I'm going to be talking about, the complainant was not deceased. So we've got the forensic medical officer. Now, depending on the severity of the case might be escalated to the detectives. The first responders usually deal with more straightforward cases. If it gets more complex, then the detectives get involved. Once the detectives get involved, the next people who might get involved might be the crime scene investigators. So the crime scene investigators, depending on the jurisdiction in Australia, may be police officers, or they may be scientists. It does depend from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I should say here that the first responders would usually be police. We might have some ambulance people responding. The detectives are police. In Australia, the forensic medical officers usually work for the Department of Health or the Department of Justice, so a different government department. The crime scene investigators usually work for the police agency, but are not directly responsible to the detectives. They're independent of the detectives. They work in a separate department within the police service. You then might have the samples collected either by the forensic medical officer or the crime scene investigator, those samples being examined by the forensic science laboratory. The forensic laboratory could be one laboratory, an integrated laboratory, or it could be a laboratory where different disciplines are handled by different government departments and in different geographical areas. So for instance, in Victoria, where I live, we have an integrated forensic laboratory. So the biologists and the chemical criminalistics scientists work in the same building. So if, say, clothing came in and it needed examination for trace material, paint or glass or hair or fibres, and it also needed examination for biological material, the people from chemical criminalistics, the people from biology can discuss how they're going to actually approach this particular piece of clothing so that they can actually optimize the evidence that they're going to retrieve from it. In other states, in Australia, the biologists may work in the Department of Health, and the chemical criminalistics may work either in a police department or another government department that deals with chemical issues. So you can see there's quite a number of different groups of people, even at this stage of the investigation, who are involved in the work in relation to this case. You'll also get a lead investigator appointed, usually a detective, and they'll be the person who will be coordinating, driving the investigation. You then have a prosecuting agency. We call this the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and they will often work with the lead investigator to ensure that all the evidence, all the information is collected so that that case can be prosecuted. Once we have a suspect, or once the suspect's been charged and they become an accused, then they will have their own defence counsel. Okay, and then the matter will go to the court. As you can see, there's a large number of groups of people, and we could have up to 10 different organisations or government departments involved in the investigation of one crime. Where communication breaks down and information is not transferred from one area to another, that information is lost and we end up having problems. The case I'm going to talk to you about is one such case. As I said, it happened here in Victoria, and I think it's a useful case to examine because we can learn a lot from it. We have learned a lot from it, and I know that other people have reviewed the case and what happened, and have learnt as a result of that. Okay, so the case actually ended up having an inquiry once we realised that an error had been made, and the Honourable Frank Vincent, who had been a Supreme Court judge and was retired, led that inquiry into the circumstances that led to the conviction of Mr. Jama. So I'll just go through what actually happened in this case, and you'll see where things broke down. So, Farah Jama was convicted on the 21st of July in 2008 for rape. He was sentenced to a 6-year prison sentence with a non-parole period of 4 years. His conviction was overturned on the 7th of December 2009. By that stage, he'd been in jail for about 18 months. Now, we mustn't forget that there was another victim, and that was the complainant in this case. This seminar focuses on women and children. The person who was incorrectly convicted in this case was a man. However, there was the victim, and she was a victim. It turns out she wasn't a victim of rape, but she went through all the trauma of being a rape victim, because she was told she had been raped, and she went through all the psychological and physical trauma of being a rape victim. Whether or not this case revolves around a man or a woman, or both in this case, the lessons are relevant to cases that involve women and children, whether they are the perpetrator or they are the victim. So let's have a look at the timeline and the breakdown in communication that happened in this case and see where things could have gone or did go awry. So on Friday, the 14th of July in 2016, Farah Jama and a female associate, a friend of his, participated in consensual sexual activity. And that should be which, not with, I apologise, which did not involve intercourse. Later on, the associate regretted this activity and stated she'd been assaulted. As a result, she reported this to the police. The police took her to the Austin Hospital, where she underwent a forensic medical examination on the 15th of July. Now, the geography is important in this particular case, so I've done a clip shot here from the Google Maps. So this is the Austin Hospital here, and the offence, or supposed offence, took place in a suburb called Preston. Right? So you can see it's not actually that far away from the Austin Hospital. This was the convenient hospital which had a facility for the examination of sexual assault victims. Now, completely different case. Saturday, the 15th of July, 2016, M, our other victim, attended a nightclub and was found unconscious in the women's toilets. She had no recollection of the events prior to losing consciousness. She could have been raped. She might have been raped. She might have been assaulted. Because she might have been, she was taken to, again, the Austin Hospital and underwent a forensic medical examination on the 16th. Coincidentally, she was examined in the same examination room and by the same doctor that the other female, the associate of Farah Jama, had been examined in. Now, the reason for this is that this offence took place in Doncaster. So again, the Austin Hospital was the nearest hospital which had sexual assault facilities. All right. However, there's quite a distance between Preston and Doncaster. All right. So, Farah Jama's associate withdraws her complaint, and so the samples which were taken as part of the forensic examination were not tested by the laboratory. However, Farah Jama's reference buccal swab did remain in the system and was processed by the forensic laboratory. The vaginal swabs, which were taken from M, the second woman, provided a male DNA profile which matches Farah Jama's reference sample. So this information is then provided to the police, and the police follow up. The investigators question Farah Jama, and he states he's never been to Doncaster. And this is quite possible because he has just recently come to the country. He says he was with his father at the time of the assault. Farah Jama is from a different age group, a different cultural group, and a different racial background to the nightclub's usual patrons. There's no witness account or CCTV evidence of was a young black man had ever been to the nightclub. The only link is the DNA. So, all the forensic samples were collected at the Austin Hospital. That was one agency. The doctor collecting the samples was a member of staff of the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine. That's a second agency. The samples were analysed at the Victoria Police Forensic Science Laboratory. That's a third agency. We then have the investigators. Further down the track, we have the prosecutors, defence counsel and the court. So we're up to about 8 different agencies involved in this particular case. The investigator is actually quite switched on and asks the forensic laboratory if there's any possibility of a sample mix-up or contamination, because they knew that Farah Jama's reference sample was at the laboratory because they'd got the match. So was it possible that the DNA from Farah Jama's reference sample had somehow contaminated the vaginal swabs from M, or had there been a sample mix-up? The forensic laboratory assures the investigator that there was no sample mix-up or contamination at the laboratory. But no one thinks about asking about the collection of the samples. The investigator didn't think about that. The laboratory personnel didn't think about that. The prosecutor didn't think about it. The defence counsel didn't think about it. And the judge didn't think about it. The consequences. Farah Jama maintained his innocence throughout this whole procedure. However, he was convicted on the 21st of July 2008 for rape. Once he'd been imprisoned, he retained new solicitors who re-looked at all the information and focused on the possibility of contamination. But at this stage, they only were looking at contamination at the laboratory. But they did lodge an appeal. A review by the prosecution agency was two-pronged. Because DNA, this case relied only on DNA, there was no CCTV, there was no witness accounts, there was no other evidence of any sort. They did a review of what they called DNA-only cases, where the only link is DNA. They also reviewed the circumstances of this case. And as a result of the review of the circumstances of this case, Farah Jama's conviction was overturned on the 7th of December 2019. So, what do we think happened? We will never know what actually happened in this case. What we believe happened is that we know that dried seminal material was found in and on the associate's hair. What we believe happened is that some of this flaked off and contaminated the examination room. The examination room was cleaned overnight, but it was cleaned to hospital standards, not forensic standards. We think, we'll never know, that some of the seminal material managed to contaminate an open box of microscope slides. The process that the doctor took with when she was examining M, who's the second woman, is that once she had taken the vaginal swabs, she then wiped them, smeared them onto the microscope slide, and in the process picked up some of the flaked seminal material that was on the microscope slide. And that's how the DNA, or the spermatozoa, got onto the vaginal swab. That's, as I keep emphasising, that's what we think happened. We will never know quite what happened. So, as I say, Farah Jama's conviction was overturned. He was 19 years old when he went into jail. He was just about to go to university. It has really had a very deleterious effect for his life. But what about M? What about the woman in this case? Well, as I said, she suffered all the trauma of being a rape victim. She was told that she had been raped. She went through the trial. She went through the investigation, the subsequent investigation, only to find out that she hadn't actually been raped. She hadn't actually been assaulted. We think, again, we will never know, that she was unconscious because she'd taken a mixture of prescription medication and alcohol. But her life has also been devastated as a result of this. The Honourable Frank Vincent notes in his report, the DNA evidence appears to have been viewed as possessing an almost mystical infallibility that enabled its surroundings to be disregarded. Nobody looked at what else was going on around the case. They had the DNA and that's all they looked at. There is such danger in the uncritical acceptance of what I have earlier called the mystical infallibility attributed it to, the methods employed to collect it, and the interpretation given to it by experts, that is, reliability, must be subject to the most careful scrutiny. It became clear that the DNA evidence was perceived as so powerful by all those involved in the case that none of the filters on which our system of criminal justice depends to maximise the risk of miscarriage of justice operate effectively at any stage until a matter of weeks before Mr. Jama's appeal was expected to be heard. Please excuse me, I do need to cough. My apologies. As a result of this case, there has been some academic research undertaken in Australia. And there's two papers have been published in Forensic Science International. And what these papers highlighted was the fact that if you just, again, I don't want to make you seasick, but I'm just going to very quickly scroll back to this slide, that there is regularly breakdowns in communication between these different areas of expertise. They're siloed from one another. And if we have them siloed and not communicating, well then not only will miscarriages of justice such as this occur, but we'll also lose evidence. If we don't have the biologists talking to the chemical criminalists, if we don't have the detectives talking to the crime scene investigators, or the crime scene investigators talking to the forensic medical officers, or the prosecuting agency talking to everybody, and everybody talking to the Defence Counsel, we're going to have more and more of these issues happening. Okay. So I strongly recommend these two papers to you, both, as I say, in the Forensic Science International. Sally Kelty is the first author on both of them, and they're really worthwhile having a good read. The other thing I'd like to talk about, just briefly, two more things I'd like to talk about in relation to the processing of forensic evidence or forensic items for use in court. Barry mentioned the general standard, ISO 17025, which is a general standard for all testing and calibration laboratories and is the basis of the forensic science accreditation programs around the world. There is also a suite of other standards being developed. Two of them have already been published. Three are in the process of being developed. I'm on the Working Party, the Australian Working Party, which is feeding into this. And what we're doing with these standards, and we're hoping that they will expand, but if you can see this slide, what we're trying to do is have a series of standards which controls the whole forensic process. If we go back again, I don't want to make people seasick. These standards really talk focus very heavily on the analytical side of our testing. These standards here go from end-to-end processing, from scene control, scene examination, collection and transport, analysis, interpretation and reporting. Then they cover all the forensic disciplines, from the physical police sciences such as ballistics and fingerprints, through forensic medical examination, to the analytical sciences, the biologies, the chemistries, etc. Once we've got this bedded down, it would be really great to see the information then flowing on, so this flow chart flowing on into the court process, so that we can make sure that we have guidelines and structure around the way in which things are done. I don't know what the situation is in India, but in Australia we have, and particularly in Victoria, we have a large number of court documents which actually talk about and give guidance to the way in which forensic evidence is presented in court. And we've got a practice note about forensic reporting and forensic evidence provision, which is very, very useful, and if people are interested I can provide that to them. So I just wanted to highlight the development of these standards. I know that India is part of ISO, so your Indian standards body will be participating in this process in some way, so it might be worth following that up. The other thing I'd just quickly like to talk to, and again a question came up during Barry's presentation, and that is to do with DNA contamination. Some of you will know about this case, the Phantom of Hillbrand, or the Woman Without a Face, and it relates to a woman who was thought to be a serial killer, and her DNA profile was found at 40 crime scenes, including 6 murders across Europe, from 1993 to 2009. In 2009, the investigators concluded that the phantom criminal did not actually exist, and the DNA recovered from the crime scenes had already been present on the cotton swabs used in collecting the DNA samples. So basically it came from a woman in one of the manufacturing facilities. As a result of this, we've developed a ISO standard for the manufacturers of DNA consumables. So this is either DNA profiling kits or it's collection kits. So there was a question in Barry's session about ensuring that the actual kits that are used to collect the DNA are DNA free. This is the standard that you would use, and the manufacturer should be looking at becoming accredited to this standard. There aren't any manufacturers at the moment in India accredited, but there are in other parts of the world. And again, I can give you more information on that if you're interested. And if you're interested in finding out which of the consumables companies are actually accredited, that information is on my website, because Forensic Foundations are the auditors for this standard around the world. So I'll stop here